Today we're going to talk about advantages of both the North and the South. Going into the war, each side had its own set of advantages that they thought would lead them to victory. I mentioned this earlier. At the beginning of the war, both the North and the South thought they were going to win the war. And not only did they think they were going to win the war, they thought they would win the war fairly quickly. I don't think either side had any idea that it was going to go on for 4 years. So let's start with the North. You'll see really quickly the North is more number-based. So we start population. In the North, there are about 22 million people living there as opposed to 9 million for the South. More people to work in the factories, serve in the military. Something to add in there, this was even more of an advantage because out of the 9 million Southerners, 4 million are slaves. So slave owners are never going to allow their slaves to fight in the war. And the reason why is they paid a lot of money for the slave. The slave could get injured or even killed. Also, I don't think they're going to trust their slaves with guns in their hand because they could use those to rebel. 90% of the factories and industry was in the North. This would be an advantage. It's going to be a lot easier for them to make things, whether that's guns or bullets or tents or uniforms or cannons. They have the factories in place to build those things that are needed in war. Another number one, the railroads. 70% of all railroads were located in the North. So you can kind of combine these two. If you're making cannons up in New York and you need them to get to the battlefield in North Carolina, if you have a better system of railroads, you're going to be able to get those materials there much quicker. The South had some railroads, but their network wasn't as extensive. The North was not a brand new country like the South. So everything was already set in place and established. Perhaps the biggest advantage was the Navy. The South, when they formed their own country, they had no Navy. They had no ships, nothing. So they're going to have to build that from scratch, which is going to be a disadvantage for the South and obviously a northern advantage. The final one is the North. Again, being the established country, the United States, their economy is already set. They have a good system of currency and money in place. This is going to be a struggle for the South throughout the war. They're going to come up with their own currency, but they're going to deal with inflation a lot more, so stuff was more expensive. All in all, the economy was much better in the North. Switching to Southern advantages. And you'll see right away these are different. Okay, no numbers involved in them, but a unique set of advantages nonetheless. Number one, I titled Defending Homeland or Highly Motivated. So Southerners are fighting literally for everything. They're fighting for their homes, their land, they have slaves, their way of life. So if they lose this war, they stand to lose a lot more than the Northern soldier. If the Northern soldier loses the war, he goes home. Life goes on pretty much as normal. We can't say the same thing for the South. Skilled and effective commanders. More of the nation's officers were Southerners. An officer is your higher ranking person in the military. It's your colonels and your lieutenants and your generals. Remember, before the North and South split, there was just one army with all these generals and officers. And then once the Southern states began to secede, a lot of these Southerners had to choose, am I going to stay in the American army or am I going to go into the Southern army? More of them chose the Southern army, so they had better overall commanders. This one I call home field advantage. 99% of all Civil War battles were fought in the South. And the reason why was because in order to win the war, the North is going to have to go down to the South and basically conquer them and defeat them and drag them back into the country. If the North never comes down, the South wins the war. Therefore, because the battles were being fought in the South, they could have the home field advantage. Maybe a couple of examples. They know good places to defend from. Maybe they know shortcuts that aren't on the maps, stuff like that. This one I just kind of mentioned, and these two kind of go hand in hand, but they're a little different. They didn't have to attack the North to win the war. It was the South that left the country. If the North wants them, they have to go down and get them back. Also, in war, it is much easier to defend than it is to attack. Attacking, typically, you're going to lose more men, it's more dangerous, etc. The final Southern advantage that I listed is Your average Southern soldier was probably better than your average Northern soldier just because they had experience growing up with things like riding horses or hunting. Okay, a lot of these Northerners, they grew up in cities. They worked in a factory from age 8. They never did these things. So think of it as a skill set. Your Southerners have a skill set already established heading into the war.